are new to our board, just for folks who are new to our board, we turn our name tents to the side if we're in person, if we want to make a comment or ask a question. And those online try to put their hands up that way. And so just so that you're not surprised when you see that, you understand what that means. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have 3 small changes to the agenda I just want to bring your attention to really quickly. First is that we didn't include the Q&A for the director's report, so we added that. Second is that Randy wasn't able to be here today, so there will not be a report from the foundation today. And the third is that the Financial Sustainability Work Group questions are going to be fielded by Ilana Pertolini because Mike was traveling. Any questions or issues with those changes before I get started? If not, I'll call the meeting to order. Saren, was there any public comment?
No, one reached out.
Terrific, thank you. So we'll go straight into the Pittock Mansion intro. I wanted to introduce and welcome Paula. I'm going
Go for it. Gangopadier.
Gangopadier. She's the new executive director of the Pittock Mansion. We're delighted to have her. Originally, she was going to do this when we were planning to meet at the mansion. Unfortunately, we determined that the sound quality wasn't going to be good enough for the hybrid meeting option. So we're delighted that she was able to join us, and she's offered a tour of the exhibit that is on site at the mansion for board members. So thank you very much for that. So with that, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of the activities at the mansion.
Sure. Thank you so much. And good evening, everyone, members of the Parks board, as well as Adina and everyone who's present here. I am Paula Gangopadier. I am the new CEO at the Pittock Mansion Society. I'm sure all of you, being Portland residents, are aware. We are the nonprofit organization that operates the Pittock Mansion Society as a museum and as an educational institution. I am relatively new in Portland. I have spent 30 plus years in Michigan, various parts of Michigan, and was based out in Detroit. But the last 5 years of my career, I was with the federal government in Washington, D.C., heading the Office of Congressional Funding for 30,000 museums across the nation. 17,000 of which are like historic house museums like the Pittock Mansion and other smaller historical institutions. I bring about 27 plus years of experience with nonprofits, museums, cultural associations, but I've also worked very closely with city government, local city government in my past jobs. I'm very passionate about education and learning opportunities. Bulk of my career has been providing learning opportunities for the underserved, populations. So worked very closely with schools, colleges, and all of that. And like I mentioned, the last 5 years being in Washington, D.C., advocating for funding from the federal government for institutions that are making local impact is very, very important. And, so as I come and join the Pittock Mansion, I'm a big picture thinker. I'm always looking at the entire city, and how can we bring more resources, more network resources. So do tap me, as I've told Adina when we had our introductory meeting, do tap me, for connections and resources that I would like to bring. I joined the Pittock Mansion in the month of May, and time flies, as they say, when you're doing good things. And very fortunate, of course, Pittock Mansion is an iconic historic structure, thanks to the city for saving it, for posterity, and the citizens of, Portland for saving it. And like many museums, large and small, Pittock Mansion Society, of course, had to go through, the challenges posed by the pandemic. But, I'm glad to report that thanks to the government funding, as well as generous donations by some of our patrons and donors, we survived. We, of course, had to take the hard decisions like many museums had to. We had to lay off staff and, sort of operate in sort of the minimalistic manner. But thanks to the wise decisions that the board took and many of the staff who, kept it going, as I would say. So I joined in May, and I have now laid out what I'm calling Pittock 2.0, the new vision for the Pittock Mansion Society. It has tremendous potential, and everyone is really excited about the new vision. In simple words, what that means is transforming the museum into the future, sort of defining the next chapter of what it can be, rather than just being a house of beauty, just being a historic site museum. What are some of the things it can do? And Pittock 2.0 is really rooted in 3 R's, as I say. The first R is relevance. Institutions, if they want to be educational institution, if they want to do community engagement, they cannot really succeed if they are not relevant. And so part of relevance is going to be really bringing DEAI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, access, walking the walk on those things. It's a complex topic. It's not a quick fix. We don't want to do things, just for tokenism. So, but I bring tremendous amount of experience and resources in doing that. So 2 examples that I will share with you where we are bringing DEI into action. One is that we as an institution have made the decision that every year we will be showcasing, apart from the Pittock family story and the architectural beauty, the story, we'll be sharing the story of other communities, diverse communities. We had an exhibit on Vanport, and then now we are showing Black in Oregon. That's about Black pioneers in Oregon. The exhibit that's opening up in spring is called This is Kalapulean Land, about our indigenous, artists and their art. So every year in the fall, or at least one season, we'll be focusing and showcasing stories, the untold stories of community that are not represented. We're not going to be replicating what's already happening at other museums, but we'll work in collaboration so that, we do that. And the other half, we'll be focusing on art, architecture, because Pittock Mansion, as you know, with the Vista, point that's there, it is very popular amongst many tourists who are visiting Portland, for the first time. So we'll sort of balance both cultural connections, showcasing cultural connections, as well as art and museum. The second thing that I'm bringing to Pittock Mansion is participation in a national program that I started in DC. More than 800 museums across the nation are participating in it. It's called Museums for All, and that provides access to families with EBT cards. We don't want the economic barrier to be, a barrier for families to come in and enjoy. So Pittock Mansion Society will be participating in Museums for All program, which is a national movement providing, access for the underserved, to free and reduced access, basically, to that. So those are the 2, things that we are starting right at the onset. The second thing, of course, we will do is we will tell the story of an expanded time period when the Pittocks lived and what happened in the Portland, area. And we are also going to be re-examining aspects of the story where we can teach, for example, about resilience. Henry Pittock came with I think, barefoot and sort of, built up this thing. So there's a story of resilience rather than just focusing on him as a successful, entrepreneur. We will be, working on digital programs because we are living in the 21st century. COVID was a moment where many museums had to pivot to digital, but digital should not be optional. We will establish a digital platform and bring our collections, to life, through the digital platform as well. And of course, I'll be helping the organization lay out a strategic plan, for the next couple of years. So we have a lot to do. We are building back our staff team, and it'll always remain small. Small and big is relative. I've come from the Henry Ford museums where we had 1,600 staff members, $65 million budget, but small museums can also make a big impact, and that's sort of my commitment to Portland here. We are building back our team. We are working on some infrastructure improvement. A lot of that is needed for us to really deliver on the PITAC 2.0 promise. But I will conclude by saying that our partnership with City and Parks is so critical and essential. You own the buildings, the city, the city residents save the buildings, but the buildings are 100+ years old and they have big preservation needs. We know that Parks and Recreation cannot do it alone. We as a small profit cannot do it alone. We have to do it in collaboration, because if we don't have the buildings, all the plans and everything that we have cannot be realized. So that's where we will be looking forward to working with you, Adina, with your staff and with the board support and with everybody's support, so that we are proactive about the preservation needs. The board has reenacted a preservation committee. We are taking a systematic look at all the preservation needs of all the 3 buildings. We are actually going to be working on a study that brings back everything that has been done in the past, everything that's needed, and putting it all together. And then, we would love to come back and sit down with you all at the table to say, how do we address, some of these things? So that basically, concludes my brief overview of where we are, what we are planning to do. And I love Portland. It's new, but one of the big things that attracted me besides the job is that my only daughter lives in Portland, and I'm a newly minted grandma of a grandson who's now 15 months old, Luca Langella. And, that was a big thing for me to say no to Stanford and many other job offers that I had. And I said, I'm going to Portland. So here I am. I bring energy, I bring my resources, I bring my commitment, and I look forward to working with all of you and, getting to know all of you.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that overview. We're really excited about your vision and seeing it come to fruition. Any questions for Paula from anybody?
Paula, this is Adina. Thank you again for coming today. We appreciate it. We're sorry that our traveling roadshow didn't make it to PITAC, but we really appreciate the invitation that you've extended to the board and staff. I've actually seen the exhibit, and it's very, very moving and a little depressing.
I'm excited.
It's reality, right?
Yes, it is. I see David has his card up.
I put my card up. Yeah. Hi, Paula. Thank you. Nice to meet you. Can't wait to meet you in person sometime.
Absolutely.
So knowing that we couldn't go there because of the audiovisual challenges, is that something that you're tracking to help bring the PITAC Mansion into the future, is maybe having a conference space that has high-tech capabilities?
We can only do so much high tech, but
Yeah.
absolutely, we are
Okay.
definitely working on Wi-Fi. As you know, we have very restricted space. We only have the social room in the basement, currently. But we actually held our board meeting with Zoom, capabilities, and it worked. It worked absolutely fine. So, we are able to do that, but I've written like a big infrastructure improvement grant. We will know whether we get it or not. And we will definitely, keep working on that so that we are able to offer. It'll never be the state of art facility like you all have in downtown. I visited that building, but we can do whatever we can within a 100-year-old historic structure. Let's say that.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, David. That was a question that we asked staff as well with respect to the other community centers in the context of, being a desired rental
Yeah.
venue.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions for Paula? Thank you, Paula. We're looking forward to arranging our visit to see the exhibit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if it's okay, then I'll leave the meeting and we
Perfect.
connect back with you. Saren,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
With that, we have our HRAR training. Adina was going to introduce. Kathy.
I got bumped off of Zoom, so
Well-
I can't tell if Kathy's on yet.
No, she's not on yet. She was at an all-day conference and she was expecting, to go at 5:30. So I believe since we're ahead of schedule, maybe let's give her a few more minutes. So
Okay.
can
Okay,
we?
that's great. We'll come back to that when Kathy arrives.
But
We'll,
someone
um,
has a question. Erin has a question.
Erin.
I just want to acknowledge, I don't know if you see in the chat, but it does appear that someone that's on the Zoom may be at the Piddock Mansion looking for our meeting. And so I thought it might make sense, besides me just acknowledging that in the chat, if we want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, yes. And I did write back to them directly, but thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah,
Is there
sorry,
anything?
sorry, Gabe. We opened the meeting noting that the audio quality wasn't going to be good enough at the Piddock Mansion. And so we opted, the Community Engagement Working Group recommended that we revert back to the Portland building. And we're hoping by spring, there will be more options at community centers and other parks buildings so that we can get back out into the community. So Gabe, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. I hope you didn't end up going there and being disappointed that we weren't there. So
Oh, it's okay. I've never been here, so it's a nice view anyway.
great. I'm glad you can visit. Check out the exhibit. I heard it's great. All right. Well, with that, we'll come back to Kathy and the HRAR training. We can move to the September meeting minutes. I hope everyone had a chance to review them. Any questions or comments? We did have some small corrections that Erin noted and sent to Michelle, and I believe that those were incorporated. Any other comments, questions, corrections? Corbin.
I have a correction. It's on page 5. First line, second paragraph. It should read the Parks Board to Center Parks. Let me see if I can find it with it. So it's on page 5, the meeting minutes, second paragraph, first line. And I think it says, for some reason it's not coming up right now. Parks to center the Parks Board. I think it's flipped a little bit.
And I think I might have found that one. Is it the one that says that like the Parks Board is critical
Board.
infrastructure?
Yes.
Yeah, Erin
That should
catch that
be,
one.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Erin had noted that directly to Michelle and Michelle made changes.
Great.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, corrections on the minutes?
I don't have a correction, but I have a suggestion
Go for it.
regarding the minutes. If we could stay away from jargon and acronyms without spelling them out, this makes it harder for community members to understand it. I'm for, it might be different for other people, the use of last names in meeting documents. Adding board to members present within the meeting minutes, and then adding city staff titles to the meeting documents. I think that will help as we rotate in and out, that we know who the here and where they're stationed within Parks and Rec. That's all I have for now.
Thank you for the suggestions. I agree. So hopefully we can implement that. Any other comments? If there aren't, I will entertain a motion from the floor to approve the minutes with the suggestions and corrections noted.
I'll motion to approve.
Thank you, David. Any second? I guess Adrian, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Oh, and it looks like Kathy has now logged in. So we can go to the HRAR training. Adina, if Kathy, if you're ready, and Adina has a brief introduction for you.
Kathy, I'll tap dance for a few moments while you get settled.
Okay.
So we have Kathy Sharp with us today. She is one of 2 human resource business partners who are assigned to the Bureau, and they help provide guidance and assistance for all personnel matters. Today, Kathy will cover HRAR, Human Resource Administrative Rule 2.02, which prohibits workplace harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. The reason why we've asked her here today is because this rule covers all elected officials, employees, interns, volunteers, applicants for employment, as well as contractors and vendors. So as volunteers, HRAR 2.02 applies to Parks board members. We've been remiss in providing this training in a consistent manner. And so we're really grateful to Kathy for making the time to share this really important information with the board today. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Adina. And should I share my screen, or is Sarah, and I think I gave you my presentation, but should I share my screen?
That is, yeah, if you want to share, if that's easy enough for you, yes, please. Otherwise, I'm happy to go ahead and share it as well. Either
No,
way.
I'll share my screen. So
Okay,
here.
super. Thank you.
Yep. Just take me a second to get to the slideshow. Okay. I'm hoping you can see my slides. Is that accurate?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. It's showing that I'm up. So if you can't see my slides yet,
No, it's okay. Let me go ahead and just pull it up. No
Thank you.
worries. Yeah, no worries.
okay.
Can everyone, I know folks in the building can see it. Can people at home see the screen?
Looks good.
Okay, great.
Great.
All right, take it away. And here, let me make sure I can advance it. There you go. Okay, take it away,
Okay.
Kathy.
Oh, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here and welcome to me today. I'm happy to be here to talk about our administrative rule 2.02, workplace harassment, discrimination, racism, and retaliation prevention. The agenda, if you want to go forward slide or next slide.
Sorry, now I'm having technical difficulties.
So we're gonna go do a quick overview of the policy. Adina talked about who was covered by the rule. We're gonna give some I'm gonna give some examples of prohibited conduct, and then what you should do if it happens in the workplace or during your volunteer time, and who to contact and who to report to. I've been given about 15 minutes, so I'm gonna go fairly quickly, but the slides will and my brief discussion of the slides will be brief enough that we'll have a few minutes to talk at the end of the presentation. I want to start by just giving a quick overview of our city core values. In June of 2022, the City Council formally adopted 6 core values of anti-racism, equity, transparency, communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility. And these values just don't only reflect what we do, but how we do it. And so in the middle, in the center are the values, and then the outward circle on the outside, that's how we implement the city core values. And these values are in alignment with HR 2.02 and the city's desire to prohibit these workplace harassment, discrimination, racism, and retaliation. Next slide. We have the rule because we know that the impacts of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation, and we know the impact on our employees and volunteers like yourself, and it's the city's #1 concern to have a work environment that's respectful, inclusive, equitable, and professional, and promotes equal opportunities and is free from harassment, discrimination, racism, and retaliation. And as a volunteer, and you are part of the work environment and the work that you do as as being on part of the board. So I know that if each of us I'm not going to call anybody out, but if you just think about a time when you were in the workplace or another community environment where you didn't feel included, or where you felt discriminated against or harassed. And that usually brings up pretty strong emotions for people. And so it just is, you know, it helps to codify why we're talking about this evening, and why we provide the training is because we want our workplace to be free from those types of feelings and those things happening there. So the City of Portland is committed to creating a respectful, inclusive, equitable, and professional workplace that promotes equal employment opportunities and is free from harassment, discrimination, racism, and retaliation. And we prohibit this activity based on protected class. And if you'll scroll down there, this is a list of all of the protected class under Oregon law and under federal law. And as you review that list, you'll find that it's about everyone. Everyone has a protected class. Everyone has a gender, a race, an age. And so everyone is protected by this rule. There's a few examples on here that may not be as familiar to you. But like the source of income is designed to prevent discrimination in housing. Marital status, the lack of a spouse or having a spouse we don't discriminate against. And then familial. There's a new one, it's for non-religion. So somebody is protected even if they do for not having a religion. So as Adina said in the beginning when she introduced me, elected officials, employees, interns, volunteers, applicants with the City of Portland, and contractors are all covered by this rule. Next slide. And so harassment is inappropriate or derogatory verbal or physical conduct or showing hostility towards someone related to the protected class. And harassment, it doesn't matter about the intent. So if somebody is making harassing statements or they're using racial slurs or they're saying jokes or that include stereotyping, and then they say, just kidding, or it still matters, right? It's still harassment. And then if you're talking to a friend and you're making a joke or you're talking about a racial slur and somebody overhears you, still matters. That's still a prohibited conduct. This is a good moment to talk, just before we go on, it's a good moment to talk about bullying in the workplace. So bullying is a type of discourteous behavior, and the city also recognizes the impact that bullying and disrespectful and discourteous treatment can have on the work environment. And everyone working or volunteering for the city has a role and responsibility in creating a positive and constructive work environment where all employees and volunteers are treated respectfully. And bullying is the intentional verbal or nonverbal conduct by an individual against another individual over a period of time. And so bullying can become harassment. And examples of bullying is like harmful gossip or behaviors that demean, humiliate, or intimidate others in the workplace, or deliberate exclusion of other employees from work assignments or networks that is not due to legitimate business reasons. Next slide. Sexual harassment is a specific type of harassment that includes unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other sexually oriented verbal or physical conduct. In some cases, sexual harassment's about power, a person wielding it who sexually harasses the other person who doesn't have power. Most typical examples of power imbalance in sexual harassment cases is where a junior staff member is subject to unwelcome advances or other conduct by their supervisor or another senior member of staff. But the bottom line around sexual harassment is any actions or words with a sexual connotation that interfere with an employee's ability to work or that create an uncomfortable atmosphere are considered sexual harassment. Next slide. And then discrimination is the unequal or different treatment of an individual in any personnel action based on protected status. Discrimination generally implies a power imbalance between the person being discriminated against and the person doing the discriminating. So examples are making employment decisions such as promotional decisions, hiring decisions, discharge or layoffs, selection based on a protected class, but using stereotypes or assumptions for the purposes of employment decisions, or denial or exclusion from information or meetings that could impact successful job performance, or collusion with another person to treat someone negatively based on a protected class. Next slide. And this slide gives examples of racism. So racial slurs, racist jokes or cartoons, racial stereotypes, or singing along to racist songs or lyrics. Next slide. When we talk about harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, we talk about it in the workplace setting. And the workplace setting can be anywhere that you're representing the city of Portland. And so it could be in the Portland building where you are, but it also could be on a Zoom meeting, where some of us are on Zoom. It could be in a vehicle, at events where you're representing the city of Portland, and it also could be teleworking from home. So any HR 2.02 applies in all of these situations. So what do you do if you see or experience the prohibited behavior? It's great if you feel comfortable and you feel safe to talk to the other person and ask them to stop it. But that does take a measure of safety. You have to feel like it'd be okay for you to do that. But if you're able to do that, that can stop it at the lowest level. If it continues after you ask the person to stop, then we would ask that you report it to a City of Portland manager on the park board. And then they can bring me in and I can help with that. And then we ask that you ask for the support that you need, right? For if something occurs in the workplace. So there's a responding, reporting, and a support component if you experience that behavior. Like I said in the very beginning, it's really important to the city that stop this type of behavior and that we protect others from it. So you could even give me a call. I'm listed on the city's website. So my name is Adina, and introduced me, but Kathy Sharps. Right? So at least talk to somebody about it, right? So we have an opportunity to make the change. And that goes on to who when you make a contact, you'll be asked for details, and we generally we investigate complaints. And when I say investigate, that doesn't mean that there are lots of different styles of investigation. We just make inquiry, but we do make inquiry, and we make enough inquiry, and we do enough of an investigation that we understand what occurred, and then work towards stopping the behavior from occurring again. Please note that we provide support. We try to support you when you make a complaint, when you bring something forward. And then when the investigation is complete, we do advise people that it's been complete, and that if it's been substantiated or not, and and that we've taken appropriate action. But our real aim is to stop the prohibited behavior. Next slide. If you need to talk to someone about an HR 2.02 issue, we take your complaints seriously, and we keep them confidential to the point that we can. We have to do enough investigation that we can understand and we can seek to stop the behavior, but we only share on a business need to know. So we wouldn't share with everyone on the Parks Board what somebody was happening to them, but we would investigate it to understand what had occurred. So we ask people to cooperate, and then we give you the support that you need in order to continue participating as you would like. So thank you. That's a really brief introduction of HR 2.02. And I know that you got a copy of the rule. So if you had a chance to look at the rule, was there anything you were hoping that I was going to cover this evening that I didn't cover? Or do you have questions?
Thank you, Kathy, for that overview. Appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions for Kathy? Corbin.
Thank you so much for bringing this forward. I was wondering, do you have a presentation that is focused on volunteers, board members, committees, or commission members that's geared specifically to that group that's not necessarily employed by the city?
We would use the same process for volunteer groups. I don't have another presentation, right?
Okay.
Yes.
So I guess my follow-up question would be, if there's inner volunteer issues and you're walking down the street, so it's not technically a workplace setting.
Mhm.
And I think that's my concern is what happens in that gray area when you might be with, work colleagues or volunteers, you're not at a work setting, but there might be some words used. I'm thinking anywhere from somebody saying something to you on the street, or somebody that might have a Facebook post, things, YouTube, TikToks that have really questionable material that, lumps in all those issues with slurs and racism and everything like that. How is that handled? Is that handled as outside of the purview of the city?
Yeah, so people have personal Facebook and social media accounts. They have, and of course, people are on their own time. When people are on their own time and they're not representing the city of Portland, then they can do as they want, right? We don't monitor their behavior unless there's a nexus back to the workplace. So if somebody was talking, if somebody on their Facebook account was saying, I volunteer for the city of Portland, or I work for the city of Portland, and this is my job, and XYZ, and they're making racial slurs, then there's a nexus back to the workplace then. But if they're Mary Jane or John Doe citizen and they have a Facebook account, then then we're not going to monitor that or investigate that type of what they have on their Facebook page.
Yeah, you explained
point?
that. Thank you so much. If I can make a suggestion, during our board retreats that we'll have this come up, each board retreat, that we will review this document. That way, when people are onboarding and leaving, we will have this information each year.
Yeah, we'll definitely include it as a part of the onboarding moving forward. And yeah, we're happy to, as the board wishes in terms of an agenda, when we talk about the retreat, certainly makes sense. Similar to how we sort of, we review the bylaws and, other foundational documents.
Yeah, it was brought to our attention last month. And so that's why I wanted to get it happening
Yeah, I think it's
as
great.
soon as possible.
Appreciate it.
Alejandro,
Yeah, very quickly, just, hi Kathy.
Hi.
I'm curious about kind of like the reporting steps. As presented, it seems like the burden is on the victim of any harassment. So I'm wondering if there's any more thoughts about like third-party reporting.
Certainly, we do. There is room for third-party reporting. If you see or hear harassment or discrimination, then yes, you can report that and we look into that, right? So yeah, it doesn't matter intent or overheard, because if two people are talking and a third party overhears it and it's, say it's an offensive joke or it's something that offense, then we look into third party reports also.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Mhm. And
thank you, Kathy. Go ahead.
Mike.
I was just gonna say, I see Mike has his hand up. I can see that.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So I hadn't thought about the volunteers much, but one question that kind of comes to mind in terms of risk is if a volunteer is harassing another volunteer in the course of the volunteer activities, is the city potentially liable for anything in that realm?
I'm not an attorney. So, and I don't play one on TV. So I'm not gonna speak from that. The city has a reason. We do training so that we can try to educate and avoid having harassment, discrimination, retaliation happen in the workplace. When it does, then we take action, we investigate it, and we look at it, and then we put if it occurred, then if it's found to have occurred, then we do some kind of appropriate action for it not to occur again. So the city takes it seriously, and we certainly, if we're not taking appropriate steps to prevent harassment, then there's some liability there, right? But
Thanks. I wasn't trying to get you to practice law or anything.
yeah.
It was just kind of a general curiosity of where the
Yeah. Mhm.
Thank you. Any other questions for Kathy? Thank you for bringing this to us, Kathy, and we will try to have it as a regular ongoing thing as we onboard new board members.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, and reach out if you have any questions, right? Okay.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
uh-huh.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Have a good meeting.
Okay, with that, we'll move to any questions on the director's report. Hopefully, everybody had a chance to review the director's report. If there were any questions for Dina?
Scanning.
Corbin and then Adrian.
It's just a clarifying question. I believe it's, like, I can't remember what page it's on. But you're talking about mission, vision, values, racial equity, and the statement was finalized. And I was wondering, and it says January, are we talking about January? What year are we talking about? Because I was looking at the milestone and I saw the dates, but not the year. So is that 2022? Is that?
And that was a part of the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland?
Yeah, it's in the first part of it. Let me. Sorry, I'm not using.
No,
my
and
regular
I'm
book.
sorry, I should have had it pulled up.
I think it's referencing end of January 2023 date to have final
Oh, to have
draft.
the,
Okay, is that what it is? Because it's on, yeah, it's on the first page. I finally found it. And it says October 26th, November 23rd, January.
yes, it would have been January of 2023. Yeah,
2023,
yeah,
okay.
that's forward thinking, sorry.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure, because it said it was finalized, which is
Yeah.
past tense, so I thought it
We
already
use
passed
the
it.
to be finalized, how's that?
Okay, and I was wondering what was the, where would be the community input in that? Where's that
Oh, well,
within the
we
process?
yeah, well, we did the listening and learning for that work this whole past year. So that has already occurred.
Have you brought it before the board for community input? Is
Yes.
that what- Okay. And so those were my only question. I was trying to figure out what years you were talking.
Yeah,
about.
sorry about
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you. Adrian?
My question, I think it may be follow up to your last report, but there's a question about the planned contracting for doing cleaning and maintenance of community centers, and sort of where that's at, and the larger question of, what's your vision or expectation around that type of maintenance, and your thoughts on the best way to get there. I'm a user of Matt Dishman, and for a long time, it's been, at least in the trainings of the swim staff and other staff, there was kind of the expectation of them doing touch-up cleaning. I don't know if that's still the expectation, but that along with, I know we've had some difficulty spending the money that we've been given for operations this last year. And so there's definitely a need, I think, for improved, ongoing maintenance like that.
Yeah.
So
So we've had troubles with our contract for quite a while. They have not provided the service level that we were hoping for, I guess is the best way to put it. I know Saren is there anything that you can add? Because you were pretty closely involved in that.
I'm too closely involved with that contract. I mean, so Jamie Sandus and Maximo have done a great job of anytime there are issues with our janitorial, specifically the janitorial service provider, which is of course different from the lifeguards and aquatic. They're not obviously contractors. Anytime there's issues with those, they meet with their team and let them know what the problems are. And they have seen a lot of success when they do have those meetings. However, I did hear recently that one of their supervisors at Northwest Success recently left. It's the same old story over and over and over again about labor shortage, of course. And so they're bringing on this is too much detail, but they had then one supervisor who would then have to fill in for staff when they left. And so they were just asking a lot of that person, yada, yada, yada. We are definitely in conversation with them. And they have been very responsive each time that we do see issues. The other part of the challenge is, we want to keep them and we want them to be successful. We're in negotiation with them for a new contract. They are required to meet certain what's called labor peace. We have a labor peace policy at the city, so they have to work that out with a union to make sure that the union agrees to kind of how their business is running, and they won't stop folks from unionizing, you know, that sort of agreement from happening. So there's negotiations that they have to do outside of the city to set up a new contract, and they are working that out. And once that happens, I'll know whether we'll have a new contract or not. So the answer to your question is yes, right. And anytime something like that comes up, please do share it with the staff at the facility. They will of course run it up to Jamie, and she can of course talk to the contractor to make sure they're doing what they're being paid to do.
Thanks
So
for jumping
yeah.
in, Sarah.
It might be a larger agenda item, but I mean, I don't think it's a one-time thing. It's been sort of for years that, you know, there's a little bit of a kind of second-class citizen kind of cleanliness, which at least, you know, for me, you know, I want our community members to have, you know, the best that's out there. And especially if we have the money, it'd be nice to figure out, well, how do we do that?
Yeah, I don't think it's not a financial resource problem. It's
a
a
staffing and
it's a
organization.
yeah, right, but it's also policy, right? Like we're required to, the contract has requirements around it. And so,
Yeah.
you know, and whoever we enter into the contract with, they have, you know, service levels that are required as well. So it's not as easy as being like, oh, we have, the staff aren't working out, we're gonna hire new staff. It's a lot more complex. So yeah, operationally.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions for Director Long? If not, we'll move into the working group reports. I was surprised that Casey didn't log in, and I texted him and I didn't hear anything from him. But I know Ally is very well versed in what's going on with Board Affairs. So are there any questions for Board Affairs? And Ally, would you be willing to field those if there are?
Sorry, I am actually in a car, so I'm not feeling great about, so sorry, I will not be able to.
No worries.
Casey originally asked me to step in and I said I couldn't for October.
Oh.
Because he was going to be absent, but I don't know if he asked anyone else in the group.
Yeah, well, maybe we don't have questions, so maybe it's not an issue.
Hopefully we don't have questions.
Yeah, so does anyone have any key questions with respect to, I mean, I know we also have Ilana and Corbin, you're on that committee as well. Are there any questions on that? And if there's no questions, then we're smooth sailing anyway. All right, well, I hope Casey's okay. Like I said, I just texted him and didn't get a reply, so.
He must have RSVP'd to Michelle, because it's on our list that he's going to be absent, so.
Oh,
yeah.
interesting. And somehow I didn't catch that, so my apologies.
Maybe I mistaken too. I thought I was supposed to take over the meeting for October, maybe we met before.
Oh, maybe. We will clarify that with you.
We're all good.
Maybe he's at the Pinnock Mansion.
Well, apparently you've already to Michelle. and he wants to
Enjoying the
do
view.
that.
Sunset, he's watching the sunset.
All right, well, with that, let's move on to land use and infrastructure. Any questions for David? Mike?
Yeah, mine's just more of a curiosity question. I noticed that on the watch list, Alpenrose Dairy was on there. And I'm just curious what Parks tie-in is with the dairy.
The users of the velodrome have expressed interest in relocating that service to a Parks property, namely PIR. But there's no funding that comes with it, and PIR is an enterprise fund, and so we're, there's no capital funding that available for that, and we have a lot of deferred maintenance there as well. So that's one part of the connection, and then the other part of the connection, and I think, do we have anyone from Assets and Development here to correct me if I'm wrong?
All right.
Yeah, the Red Electric Trail is in that general location, Lauren? you
Yeah,
speak to
that's
that?
right. That's right.
So close.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, you're correct about that, Adina. Yeah, everything you said is accurate. To date, the Red Electric Trail is not, the new developer will have to put in part of it, but we don't have an official development. The first developer backed out.
I hope that's helpful.
That is, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the land use and infrastructure work group?
I will admit, I think my notes are pretty acronym intensive, and I could probably do a better job at identifying folks, so I hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
We can all be more thorough, I
Yes,
suppose.
yes.
We will strive to do so. Okay, if there are no other questions for land use and infrastructure, we'll move on to financial sustainability work group. And as I mentioned, Ilana is going to be fielding these questions. Mike was unable to attend the last work group meeting due to travel. Any questions on the deep dive that the financial sustainability work group received? For Ilana?
I want to thank everybody for making it look like I can answer every question.
You're so thorough. Great. If there are no questions there, we'll move on to the community engagement work group. Any questions for Aaron or Corbin? Would you like me to put both of your names on the agendas? Heretofore?
That'd be great.
Sure, okay. No questions for community engagement work group? Well, let's move on then. As I mentioned, we're not going to have a foundation report today. Randy's out of town and he was not able to send somebody in his stead. So we'll move on to the tree planting MOU between the Parks Bureau and BES. I see that Angie DeSalvo has joined us. And there's Jen Cairo. Did you want to provide any kind of intro?
Well, I'm gonna be a part of this conversation.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'll do some introductory comments. So, of course, we want to start by saying and acknowledging the need for this work that we're doing around tree planting and managing the urban forest. And as you all know, many of you are very keen on this area. We all have a role as community members and city and vital interest in preserving and growing our city's tree canopy. And this work's always been important. And we recognize that there's a heightened urgency right now that we're dealing with. In the last few years, Portland has experienced the widespread and at times fatal impacts of our changing climate. The most severe of these are experienced by those who are living in low canopy areas of the city. And we know that those community members are disproportionately have lower incomes and are people of color. So we recognize that we have a responsibility to continually improve the tree planting services that the city provides and ensure that we're delivering in a manner that is responsive to the community needs. I'm going to pass to Jen, who's going to talk a little bit about the background on the agreement.
Thanks, Adina. Good evening, Parks Board. Good to see you. So background, yes, on this MOU. Beginning in 2019, at the direction of then Parks and BES Commissioner Nick Fish, Parks and BES staff initiated an inter-bureau process to improve the city's delivery of tree planting services specifically. That process involved bureau directors, senior bureau leadership, and frontline staff involved in tree planting, and also included working with outside consultants and community stakeholders to evaluate current program offerings, identify inefficiencies, and produce recommended improvements. And one of the key priorities that emerged from that work was the need to clearly define roles and responsibility for managing tree planting to increase efficiency and reduce confusion and conflict. So following that process, the bureaus then convened a community stakeholder group chaired by Dr. Vivek Chandas, who was then and is now the Urban Forestry Commission chair, and Dr. Jennifer Allen of Portland State University. At the conclusion of that group's work, Parks and BES made the following commitments, and there are 5 of these. Improve outcomes for BIPOC Portlanders and low-income, low-canopy neighborhoods of Portland. Align city tree planting programs to integrate outreach, engagement, policy planning, planting, stewardship efforts, and tree life cycle management. So sort of the whole picture of trees in the city. Invest new resources in engagement to ensure tree planting activities match needs and values of the community. Make it seamless for community partners to work with the city by clarifying bureau roles and responsibilities, business processes, funding, those sorts of things. And finally, set goals with community involvement, measuring and reporting progress. And this MOU marks meaningful progress towards following through on those commitments. And to get into the specifics of the MOU, I'll turn it over to Angie DeSalvo. Angie is the manager in urban forestry who is responsible for our science outreach and planting programs. Angie.
Great, thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm pleased to come and chat with you today and to provide some of the highlights of the MOU. And I believe you guys all have a copy of it, so I'm not going to read it verbatim, but just again, provide some of those highlights. So first off, it really recognizes the roles and responsibilities of both BES and parks, and really where we fall in terms of what we do with trees. It really establishes clear priorities for the 2 programs, one within BES, one within parks. And the hope is that this is going to eliminate programmatic overlap, improve outcomes, and provide greater clarity to folks in the community about who does what. And so in a nutshell, BES is going to prioritize planting trees on commercial, industrial, and multifamily properties. And parks will plant trees in parks, of course, along streets, at schools, and at residential properties. We have set some shared planting standards and outcomes that will be pursued by planting programs in both bureaus. And that includes, of course, like prioritizing tree planting that really maximizes canopy growth. We place a lot of emphasis on large trees, native trees, evergreen trees. We're trying to promote resiliency to climate change, pests and pathogens, all of the other threats that we see coming down for the urban forests. And so this recognizes those shared goals between our bureaus. It sets an expectation that we are both going to report out on the number of trees planted, where they're at, and how our programs are doing. And so we're going to share data and make that available publicly. And it really gave us a framework for how we're going to continue doing this work in the future, so that we can improve our collaboration and we can really align on our goals. And so there are a handful of items that are in the MOU that really lay out how we're going to do that. One of them is to conduct a joint communication. So really trying to present as one city voice and to let residents know what our planting programs are across the city. We're going to pursue a shared RFP for contracts so that we can have a larger base for the number of contractors and more diverse contractors that are doing tree planting work, and they'll be based on, shared standards within. And again, we're also trying to prioritize kind of expanding the offering to contractors who have not had the opportunity yet to benefit from city funding. And we're also identifying how our planting programs can promote community building and promote workforce development opportunities. So the MOU itself is good for 2 years, and we are going to continue to meet monthly. I meet with sort of my equivalent in BES. We had our first post-MOU signing meeting today. It went very well. We're already working on progress towards some of these goals, and it was great to have some really clear direction and agreed upon outcomes for what we're working towards. So we'll continue to meet monthly, and then at the end of the 2-year period, we will review the MOU and then update as needed.
Thank you, Angie. Thanks, Jen. So there's still, of course, a lot of work to be done, but we're really pleased about the progress that we've made over the last few years. It has not been an easy road. We've gone through 4 commissioners since the concept of an MOU, was first conceived. So I'm really very pleased that we were able to sort of stay focused and get this done. Together, the 2 programs planted 4,600 trees this past planting season. And they estimate that they'll be planting 5,000 in the upcoming season, that's this fall season. And of course, there was mention about all the who does what where, but also in addition to all of those commercial, residential, schools, et cetera, BES and Parks together plant thousands of trees in natural areas as well. And I think that's really important to note as well. So this agreement is going to help to ensure that these trees will be planted with the industry best standards in mind, the established city goals around tree canopy, and of course our policies and community needs. So we're really excited to finally sort of codified many years of conversations, and I'm really excited that we'll continue to partner together. So there you have it, and open for questions.
I see David has his hand up.
So I'm kind of a numbers guy sometimes. Is there a percentage split? Like, did I miss it in the MOU? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Like, what's the balance of those relationships now between the scope of work that BES has, or is it just, it's not important?
I don't know if we could really assign a percentage, because sometimes planting is opportunistic.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's also based on development, or and it's also in some cases very voluntary, like folks planting on their own property. But I'll see if Angie or Jen might have a sense of what that breakdown might have been in the past. I don't know if that really is helpful or not.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, Jen, didn't mean to speak over you. I was just going to say, Chino and I were discussing this earlier today, and the major shift that you're going to see is that Parks is going to be focusing more on street trees, and BES is developing a new approach to their commercial, industrial, and multifamily private tree planting. So there's still a lot of program development happening on their end. But I think what you'll see, like in the coming year, Parks is around 3,500 trees or so to 4,000. And I think BES is planning on around 500, hopefully 1,000 if they can find those spaces. And then again, additional trees in natural areas. So we're focusing on, I'll just remind us all that it's more than just the number of stems that we put in the ground. There's a lot of quality over quantity that we want to focus on. But that's a general idea based on budgets right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I could add, David, as well, we didn't focus so much on percent breakdown as who's working where, so that we wouldn't be overlapping and, not being really efficient with public resources, and instead trying to be really strategic about covering more areas together in synthesis. So that's why it's broken out that way, by kind of like the types of properties where the 2 programs will plant.
Sure, thank you.
Allie?
Yeah, so I was curious because you mentioned communities of color and low-income communities, and I wondered if you all had considered looking at the disability community as another impacted community. I know Disability Rights Oregon did an inquiry and found that no one was actually looking at the data. As far as they knew, they were the only ones who were looking at the underlying health conditions of those who had died. If you have an underlying health condition, obviously the heat wave is going to be more impactful. The disability community tends to skew way lower income than other people with significantly lower employment rates. So I would just really encourage you to consider them as another frontline community that you put forward when thinking about trees.
Great, thank you.
I think Erin has her hand up.
Yeah, and then we've got, go ahead, Erin.
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm just curious about, I know urban forestry has certain, my understanding is, just like you were talking about quality over quantity standards around helping trees get established. Do the trees that BES will be responsible for planting, do they have a similar kind of process where they're going to help with establishment of those trees?
Yes, I believe that they are, I don't want to speak too much for them, but I believe that they have built establishment care about 3 years into the current work that they're planning on those commercial, industrial, and multifamily properties, if I have it right. Yeah. So really, we're trying to encourage and motivate everyone who's involved in tree planting to water, establish, prune, care for trees. It's super easy to plant, but we know it doesn't rain here in the summers. And if you're not doing that consistently for at least 3 years, you're not going to see the success rates that we need to see.
I'll also add that by partnering on the RFP, standards such as requiring a 3-year establishment within a contract is also more likely, right? I'm gonna guess she's chasing after a child.
That is likely, yeah.
I want to say that I'm super jealous of her background.
It's a great pitch.
It really is.
Can I jump back in for half a second? I did have a question there. I was wondering if you all had considered the disability community in this work yet, if that's happened or if potentially it will happen.
Thanks, Allie. I think that sort of the proxy might be that our focus has been on low income communities. I don't know that we have focused solely on the disability community, but I appreciate that nudge there, and I will certainly look into it. Our focus has been on kind of looking at factors of income, canopy, and communities of color, which often then will incorporate other communities, but that's super helpful.
Yeah, I would just encourage you to actually call up Disability Rights Oregon because they were lead on the work looking specifically at the heat wave and how it affected that community. So thank you.
Ali, thanks for putting the link to the article in the chat, and I'm sure we will be in touch with you if we need some additional resources. Really appreciate you bringing that up. And yes, sometimes we rely on that intersectionality, but it'd be interesting to see what this organization has found and see whether or not it changes our approach. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Adrian and then Corbin, I think.
Yeah, congratulations on getting this far on this, 'cause it's really tough. And I'm sure it's going to be a lot better. It makes a whole lot of sense to have the same RFP. But in follow up to that, I was wondering how you plan on selecting the contractors, what the process will be for that.
Sure, we haven't quite gotten that far yet, but we do work closely with the city procurement office and follow all of their rules and guidelines. Our focus has been, we don't select by lowest bid. We go the other route, which is based on qualifications and other factors. But some of our general goals that we're looking at are, a wider diversity, more capacity. We're looking to try and do more outreach prior to beginning the RFP process so that we can actually have conversations with potential organizations and contractors. But we'll be working on that over the coming year in partnership with the city procurement team.
Will there be community input in the selection process or just staff?
It's typically a selection committee. I assume that it could include community members, but I'm not sure this time around.
You'll have to check with procurement and what their rules are.
That's right.
On who's allowed to be on the selection committee, but yeah.
Yeah, there is procurement has a really important role in contracting with the city. that's intended really to be about keeping things fair and increasingly increasing the equity, so the opportunities for these contracts outside of those who normally get them. So we have to really follow their lead pretty closely.
I will also just comment that they do, I know that citywide they use a minority evaluator for all contracts of a certain size. Saren can probably tell me it's probably 150 or larger-ish.
Yeah, it might even be more than that, actually. Yeah. It's not coming to mind.
But I've sat on several of those panels. Corbin.
I guess I have a few questions, and let me start with this. Like, how are you thinking about diversifying green space and tree planting due to urban heat, because of urban heat island effect? I understand tree planting is really important, but it's going to take maybe 10, 15 years before we see the, the outcome of the trees being planted today. And so my question is, in the meantime, what are strategies to get green spaces into these Black, Indigenous, people of color communities? Because trees alone don't hold out the city. Actually, green spaces do as well. And as we know, there are parts of Portland that are lacking in green space. So how are we thinking about creating those green spaces to create those trees to cool down our city in the meantime versus planting now for the next generation, which it's important, but it's not going to help us next year in our heat wave.
Yeah, great question, Corbin. And I think Lauren is here, and I might ask her to respond to you, but I'll say this first. Tree planting gets a lot of attention, including in international media these days, and it is super important. Equally important is keeping and caring for the trees that we have, especially in low canopy areas where there are even fewer of them, and their impacts are really important. So that's something we focus on all the time. And Title 11, the city's tree regulations, are a primary structure in doing that. Now, as for green spaces, new green spaces in parts of town that don't have what they should have, maybe Lauren or somebody from planning could speak to that.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I'll kick it off and then I'll ask Lauren to respond. But I do two things. One, acquisitions is definitely a part of our sort of portfolio, both in our property management team as well as in our planning team. And we have and will continue to invest funds for any opportunity to acquire parks. In fact, we've got many undeveloped parks that we've purchased over the years that we haven't even developed yet. So there's really a lot of, there's untapped prime opportunity. And then there's like, and often these acquisitions are opportunistic. Like we'll have somebody who's selling, they know that they're adjacent to city parkland, and they'll reach out to us and, and say, we'd like to sell. And we also get donations. But then actually pursuing space, there's not much out there to pursue, but it is a part of our portfolio. Laura, did you want to add anything to that?
Okay, so you answered it pretty much what I would have said. Yeah, but the other thing I will add is that we have created several level of service maps that show where we have parks and where we do not have parks and park assets and natural area assets. And so we do target those areas and look for opportunities in those areas in particular, and have allocated in the past and will probably continue to do so in our STC capital growth program, a line item for acquisitions for new parks. But as Adina pointed out, we do have several parks that we have master plans for and we own the land, but we have never developed in the east side and in particular of Portland. So those are, again, showing up on our capital growth list every year for future development.
With that said, is that an opportunity to reforest those areas?
Yes.
Absolutely. Every
Versus
time.
making it that. And I think the other thing to go with this, and this is something that I've experienced being in Portland for the last 2 years, that these street trees, either they're not growing well, or when they really take root, they actually take root and like mangle the pavement, which is going to be an ADA issue eventually. So how are you thinking through planting trees differently today for the future that doesn't complicate sidewalks that could, trip hazards? It might be issues for mobility devices. How are we thinking about planting trees differently? Because it seems like the ones that are in the street medians that have more of a linear sort of park with trees in line do a lot better than the trees that are like right by the buildings that are surrounded by pavement.
Yeah, I see Sarah Huggins' hand is up. Before I turn it to her, and maybe it'll come back to Angie and I. Corbin, know that the trees that we are planting in streets will not do those things because, as Angie said, quality counts a lot, and we're paying close attention to that and purposely avoiding those types of conflicts and issues in the future, and looking for spaces and species that are going to do well in the right places. That said, Sarah, maybe your hand went down.
Well, it was actually to your first question about sort of what are all the things we do that contribute to hopefully lowering the heat island effect. And so I just wanted to flag that as part of the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland strategic framework process, the actions and results work is identifying community level outcomes. One of the ones that urban forestry has been talking about is a measurement of sort of heat island effect as an outcome, with a goal of reducing that. And then it'll be tied to a number of actions, tree planting being one, but not the only one, including, lots of actions that the Bureau is taking that would then ladder up and help contribute to that outcome. So there is sort of a process where we're going to be mapping that out and diving in a little deeper.
I just think it's really important when we do have these ecological urban conversations that we're very forthright and open with the community, that putting a tree in their front yard is not necessarily going to be helpful to this generation, something for a future generation. Because I feel like a lot of the conversations around trees are like, oh, they clean air and they do this and they do that. But trees aren't HEPA filters, because we found that out the last couple of days, that they're not going to clean the air that we want them to when we want them to. So just really having a very realistic conversation with community members. And then also, how do we plan in the meantime? I keep on using this. What's the in the meantime plan when we're having heat waves, which was like 3 heat domes. Now it's like every other week or what have you this summer. Next summer it's going to be worse. How are we thinking about the in the meantime situation? Can this be, I understand that you're with trees, but also what are the infrastructures that the city can provide to help the ecology, to help us, whether that's shading, whether that is, different types of watering practices that we're not relying on community members, but something more systemic, and thinking about the urban ecology as a larger ecosystem that we're dealing with versus assets and pieces here and there.
I thank you, Corbin. Another great question. I see Lauren McGuire's hand is up. Lauren, if you want to take it away, and I might add something after.
Sure. The other thing I will say is that we are working, Jen and I are working with PBOT on trying to make streets more friendly for trees. In particular, one of the places we're working with them is on 122nd, where we're hoping to put in a large median that could house many trees in our streets and help shade the street trees. The other areas that you'll see a lot of trees going into in our parks where our trees tend to thrive is Wilkes Headwaters, Kelly Butte, Marshall Park and the Buttes Natural Area, adding a lot more green infrastructure to the east side.
Thanks, Lauren, for mentioning that some of that work with PBOT. We're also PBOT initiated a project to basically master plan streets in the city. Like, what should our streets be designed like? Because we need so much infrastructure in our streets, which is a relatively small space in the end. So we've been very closely involved in that and are really pleased that PBOT is interested in trying to find better, non-conflicted, larger space for street trees. That project is called Streets 2035. So that's an area that's being worked on now. And we're also piloting some different ways of planting street trees right now with Bureau of Transportation, planting inside the curb where cars might park in certain streets to see how that works. It has been done successfully elsewhere. And in terms of, Corbin, what you were saying about what can be done now, I really appreciate and want to echo what you said, that is something we find ourselves explaining often to folks. The tree you plant today is great, but it's not going to really do those things that you want it to do for perhaps decades, which is why keeping the trees we have now is so very important. But as a forester, and my role is the urban forest, all of it, whatever property it's on, as an ecosystem in an urban environment, there isn't an interim solution. It's the trees we have now and the trees that we're planting to take those trees places when it comes time for them to go. If we are losing the trees we have now, then that means we have a gap. And the best we're going to do is plant more and hope that those trees survive and can provide the services of the trees we've lost. And we recently did do our 5-year update on canopy extent in the city and found that within a statistical margin of error, our canopy is declining for the first time in decades. And that's in spite of a lot of investment by many in planting trees. So that means the larger trees, the more mature trees, we have lost them. So that conversation becomes even more urgent right now about tree protection.
Thank you.
Adrian's going to have the last question, because we do need to move on.
Yeah, I see we're out of time. So just a really quick comment / question. So I know that Portland City Council is considering the climate action plan this month, and we have a special meeting tomorrow with the Urban Forestry Commission to look at changes and some of their rules and so forth. And you know, what I'm really worried about is the whole infill build and really the incentive to actually reduce green space. And where are the incentives in that action plan to increase green space? I mean, I think I was hearing Corbin say that it's not only the trees, but it's getting rid of these heat sinks, the cement, and, you know, having grass and bushes and other things that can do some cooling. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Jen, or others, about what are those incentives we might create that will counteract the infill build issue.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I think what you're speaking of that we have the special commission meeting on tomorrow is actually Portland Clean Energy Fund rather than the climate action plan.
Yes,
right?
okay, right.
Yep. But incentives, so there are incentives and disincentives currently in various city codes, such as the residential infill project that passed, within the last, 6 or 7 months that BPS led. That's new enough where it's yet to be seen whether the incentives that were put in there to keep more green space while doing infill development will be effective or not. And there are also some incentives and disincentives in Title 11, the tree code. For example, a private property developer, according to the code, does not have to keep any trees on their property, but they either have to retain or pay a mitigation rate for 1/3 of the healthy trees above a certain size on the property. And that structure and that pricing increases with the size of the tree that's lost as some way of compensating for more services from a larger tree that we all need. So that right there is more of a disincentive structure to try to help folks design to have living space for people and housing while also retaining trees when possible. As far as what else we might be able to do, that's a great question. We are planning on having another round of Title 11 amendments in the next couple years. We have to update our forest management plan first, which we started on. It's very exciting. And I am sure that Bureau of Planning and Sustainability has a big role in that too, trying to figure out how we get these things together in one place. It's quite a tension that it really needs to be an answer to both things. More housing and affordable housing and green infrastructure. How can we do both? Because we need both.
Great, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Angie, for providing us that overview on the MOU and what it entails. With that, we'll go to Sarah Huggins, providing us an update on the sustainable future. Sarah, I will stop you at 6:45 to see if we have any public comment, but if there isn't any, we will continue the sustainable future update at that point.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to start screen sharing. We can see it in the room, but can folks not in the room see?
You're good.
Okay, great, perfect. Thank you. So thank you for inviting me here tonight. At your August Parks Board meeting, I shared an update on our sustainable future work, including some updated information about our funding needs, Director Long's convening of a ballot initiative task force, and then the funding options that we were going to be reviewing with that task force. In September, the task force wrapped up their final meeting, had a great discussion, and shared their input with Director Long. So tonight, I'm going to give a brief status update, do a recap of our funding position, and then really my hope is to spend the bulk of the time that we have discussing the funding category priorities, and then walking through in a bit more detail and actually having a discussion about 7 of the 12 initial funding options that are most likely to be considered further. So at your August Parks Board meeting, I shared sort of that we were convening a ballot initiative task force, and I mentioned they wrapped up with their final meeting. I wanted to thank Casey, Paul, Bonnie, and Sabrina for participating and providing your input as part of that ballot initiative task force. This summer and fall, we also prepared, and the Office of Government Relations has submitted an initial issue paper for a potential statute change that would allow a city council to be the governing body of a parks district, which, if it was approved by city council as part of the legislative agenda, would move forward for consideration in the 2023 Oregon legislative session. We will also have some opportunities to talk about our financial position and funding options with city council over the coming months when we share our first Parks Levy annual report with council, which is scheduled for October 26th. And then again, as part of the January City Council work session that is being convened to talk about asset condition and funding, or unfortunately lack thereof, on a citywide scale. And that's actually a great work session for us to be part of, since addressing the $500 million and growing deferred maintenance backlog is one of our areas of critical funding need. Director Long and Commissioner Rubio are taking all of the great feedback that they're hearing, including the feedback that we're hoping to get from you this evening, and feedback from the Urban Forestry Commission later this month at their October meeting. And they'll be considering exploring additional options over the coming months. So without further ado, let's dive in. So this is a slide that I shared last time, but I did want to just bring it up again and refresh it so it's kind of in everyone's mind as we discuss this evening. So we're working towards achieving a sustained annual funding level in today's fiscal year 23 dollars of about $235 million. And then that could be more if we were looking at sort of additional capital growth resources for faster expansion of the system, or adding street tree maintenance, or really any other sort of service expansion. It includes a need on kind of the top operating row for about $139 million to provide service levels that Portlanders are going to be experiencing with the Parks Levy, and that includes affordable access to programs. I'll just highlight the Parks levy is providing about 1/3 of the Bureau's operational funding needs, $42 million in fiscal year 23, with the other 2/3 coming largely from the general fund and some other revenue sources. Fiscal year 26 will be the last year that PPNR will be receiving Parks levy revenues under the current voter approved 5-year term. So that means we need to pursue renewal or replacement of the Parks levy on or before 2025 to really avoid significant service reductions. And Parks levy operations funding is also needed to allow for system growth, because as we build new parks to address equity gaps, we're utilizing Parks levy resources to do their daily maintenance and operations. So maintaining operating service levels is a priority. Capital maintenance, we need about $60 million annually. We currently receive an ongoing commitment of just under $5 million from the general fund. And we need about $55 million more to reach an industry good practice level of investment. Again, that's sort of 3% of the replacement value of our system, and to prevent forecasted asset closures. So in our previous discussions, we shared kind of the magnitude of the backlog that's grown over time, what it means for future closures of assets throughout the system. And we also shared some modeling of how quickly we could actually begin to reduce the backlog if we had additional capital maintenance investment. So preventing asset failure and adequately maintaining our system is also a priority. Capital growth, the blue line, we're forecasting a need for about $36 million a year, but this is largely anticipated to be covered by future forecasted system development charge, or SDC, revenues, so accompanied by some grants and donations. With additional resources, we could make faster progress filling in equity gaps, and for example, bringing East Portland closer to the citywide average, where it's below it today. In the August discussion, we talked about kind of service levels and where we see inequities in service today. And since that meeting, I had our planning team kindly did some analysis, and it was sort of exciting to see, but with development of 2 parks that are actually currently underway, so Park Lane and Mill Park in East Portland, we anticipate that's going to actually raise East Portland to about 71% of households with walkable access. So that's a great improvement, but it's still not to the citywide average. So if we acquired and developed 13 more parks, 8 of which are currently unimproved natural areas or parks that the Bureau owns today, and 5 more that we would need to actually acquire, we could increase East Portland to match a citywide average in terms of access to parks or natural areas. So, and a rough estimate to kind of do that acquisition and development would be around $260 million. That would be eligible for funding with system development charges, and just sort of order of magnitude, $260 million is about 8 years of forecasted system development charge revenues. On street tree maintenance, so citywide, the estimate to deliver street tree maintenance was $20 million annually. And in the previous presentation in August, we discussed the inequities about the distribution of tree canopy. You've discussed it again this evening a bit, but also that the cost of maintenance for trees is really a barrier for lower income households that are looking at potentially adding street trees. So in addition to sort of the initial idea of citywide street tree maintenance, we could also explore adding street tree maintenance in a more targeted way. So utilizing an equity lens, focusing on lowest canopy areas only. And especially for a more targeted pilot, there might be additional funding opportunities than we're considering that to sort of fund the system as a whole. So there might be some more opportunity there. So this is present fiscal year. This next slide shifts 5 years in the future. So this would be 1 year post levy. Operations here is the most significant change between the 2 slides. So this, again, if we have not identified a successor resource for the Parks levy or successfully renewed it, then we will have a significant operational gap.
Sarah? Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask a quick question as you're going?
Sure.
So you mentioned the parks that were eligible for SDC funding, and what is our current SDC balance? Because as I recall, there was a fairly significant balance. Was it from 2 years ago that's been carried, or is that not the case?
Claudio, I don't know if you're on. I will share that I believe the balance to actually be a significant number, but it is mainly spoken for existing projects. So it's dollars in the fund, but there's a lot of like Mill and Park Lane that I mentioned, projects underway that are going to be spending those dollars. But if you're on, Claudio, are you able to speak to the current balance or most recent?
He's not on now, but yeah, we generally make the allocations on a year-by-year basis, as Sarah just said, and we're in the range of $16 million, I think, for allocations this upcoming year. We normally carry about a $10 million contingency. So there's flexibility to take, the risks of inflation or opportunities for acquisition. But generally, we make those allocations on a year-by-year basis. So there's not a big unallocated resource out there.
Thank you.
Right. So for anyone who likes charts more than tables, this is really that same information of present year and year 5, just in chart form. Solid colors, again, indicate the funding that we're forecasting that we would have, whereas the dashed lines indicate the funding in that category that would be a gap. So in your last meeting, we shared a version of a 5-year timeline with you, and we actually modified this based on input that we received to date. So I want to talk through that just briefly and then pause here for some discussion. We heard from many that maintaining our system and really addressing the deferred maintenance backlog, preventing asset closures, and retaining service levels is critical to prioritize. That's the kind of green hammer capital maintenance up there. We've also heard that providing an equitable park system is equally critical. That's sort of the blue increasing trees community center picture. So we've placed these two together in kind of an early position on the timeline with an eye towards really looking at how all of our funding opportunities could potentially work together to advance addressing both of these categories. We also heard that ensuring that the operational services continue is critical. So this is kind of the orange circle there. And that would mean a plan to either renew the levy or have a successor resource in place in 2025 or before 2025. So we placed it here on the 5-year horizon. With street tree maintenance, we have heard strongest interest in really looking how to start this service, not on that citywide scale, as I mentioned, but maybe as a pilot project or a targeted project, providing it in the lowest canopy, lowest income areas. So with street tree maintenance, I place this down at the bottom, kind of looking for those opportunities and potentially looking outside at other funding options other than just the ballot initiative ones that we're going to talk through later. So I really want to pause here and sort of hear from you. Does this updated timeline and this general approach reflect the values you have around our funding priorities and how they may be reflected on sort of a timeline of priority? Does this feel right? Does anything feel off about this?
Adam.
I have a two-parter. I might have missed this. Can you remind me how these priorities were established? Was this a public focus group, or was this developed by staff to have capital maintenance backlog and capital growth to address equity gaps at the forefront? How was that developed?
Yeah, so we definitely got input from the ballot initiative task force on sort of where to place these. But a lot of it was around sort of the urgency of the situation. So since 2019, when partly in the council work session and since then, as we've been talking and sharing the story about our funding need, we've gotten a lot of input from a variety of groups about kind of what to move forward when. And the levy as the first step didn't solve all of our funding needs. So I would say in all of those conversations, we've continued to hear really that maintaining what we have, preventing that backlog from continuing to grow has been a priority.
Right. And then sort of my second part of that is dovetailing off of the conversation we had about earlier about how planting trees is not necessarily going to impact folks living in Portland today. And I sort of hate to even bring this up as a suggestion to potentially put on hold the capital maintenance backlog, but to think about, if we look at this sort of through an equity lens, and if there isn't adequate green space in traditionally underserved areas, would it make sense to expand park services or expand literally physical parks within a lot of those properties that either the Parks Department owns that haven't been developed yet, or that are on target for acquisition, to lead not necessarily with ensuring that we're keeping up to date all of the assets that we already have, but thinking about what assets are in good working condition in different areas of the cities or in the city, excuse me, and then looking to develop and acquire assets to offset that gap.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a two-part answer to that. One is sort of what are we looking to preserve in part of that capital maintenance backlog? So I'll take a stab, Lauren, and then if you want to speak more to this, you'd be welcome to. But our planning team did a whole effort around levels of service, understanding kind of how our community wants to be served by various park assets. And so as part of that, we looked at sort of where we have gaps in service beyond just access to a park or natural area, but where we have gaps in playground service or community garden service, et cetera. But they also looked at where we have more than enough service in some of those areas. And so that whole body of work feeds into kind of what are we looking to preserve and where are we willing to not continue to preserve things where we might have redundancy. So I'll just, one that I happen to know of, like in Pier Park recently, we have multiple restroom structures, and we had one that was at sort of a failure point, and it's just being demolished. It's not being replaced. It's not on the backlog list anymore. It's just getting removed because there was enough service there, and we know we need to expand restrooms in areas that don't have them. So I think that conversation is happening in terms of like, what are we targeting on a backlog list? If I understood correctly, I think, your question of like, are there like opportunities to then do plantings or further expand things on parks we own? What I heard was, yes, we can absolutely plant those those properties. I think you also don't want to plant trees where then as we think about how the park is going to be developed, they would need to get taken down. So I would imagine there needs to be some thought about like, is a playground going to go here eventually, or a path, and do a planting strategy that would be complementary.
Right. Oh, and just to clarify, I don't necessarily mean directly in terms of trees. I mean more so in terms of green spaces and place for people to go. But I think the example about bathrooms definitely does answer my question, that there is thought and research being given to where can we divest from areas that have adequate service levels and prioritize ones that don't, even though that might look like we're divesting from capital maintenance and putting more money into capital growth. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm going to pause there. It is 6:46. I wanted to pause and see if anybody showed up to provide any public comment. There is.
Gabe is still
Gabe,
on.
are you here for public comment? Or are you just listening? Both are welcome. Gabe, since I cannot hear you and you're not responding, I'm going to assume you're just here to listen, which you're more than welcome to do. Thank you for showing up tonight. With that, Erin, Nova, and then Corbin.
Just curious with street tree like the idea of piloting or having targeted street tree maintenance. If you've thought about any criteria for that, I guess I'm thinking specifically about, you might have older individuals who are on fixed income. They might not live in if you identify priority neighborhoods, they might not live in a priority neighborhood, for instance, but might not have income to be able to properly maintain their trees or remove a tree. I guess I'm just curious if you're thinking more like neighborhood based, zip code based, or if you're looking at like income, that kind of thing. Maybe you haven't even gotten there yet.
It's the latter. So it's so early in sort of the discussions of this as a possibility that there isn't anything at that level of detail yet. But more of a concept of like something smaller in the areas that need it most, whatever that might be defined as.
Thank you, Erin. Go ahead, Nova.
Yeah, and my apologies if I've missed some conversation over the last couple meetings because I was not able to make our last two. The one area that I feel like since I joined the board just does not get enough attention is around play, and especially when we're talking about youth. When you look at play equity reports, both nationally and locally in the Northwest, access to youth sports has continued to plummet for youth, and that absolutely follows similar trends around income and youth of color. And I've spent a lot of time in these meetings and we just never talk about youth sports. And I feel like that is partly because of some perceptions around the voice of youth sports being already heard from. And the truth is that there's a large percentage of our population who doesn't get to talk about their desire to have access to youth sports because they're not in it and they're not in the conversations around it, because their kids aren't yet signed up to play for community leagues or community teams, so they don't even know that that access is missing, and or they've had experiences where their fields inside city limits are fields that other teams don't want to come play on from other parts of the city, and basically just that the city of Portland is not looked upon well in terms of youth sports fields, and also the fact that can be very difficult for community leagues to get field usage when there's adult leagues that are playing, and there's a lot of equity issues around access to fields, access to safe, high quality fields. We actually have a wonderful group of folks who are doing the best they can to keep our fields maintained. But I don't see youth sports. I don't see that as a priority of Portland Parks and Recreation. And I'm very worried about that. I'm also deeply invested in that work. So that's probably something for everyone to take note of as well. But I don't know how we gain back the losses from the pandemic if we don't have this on a funding priority. And I see Bonnie's note. I think pools and aquatic facilities go hand in hand with our conversations around climate change as well. So and other water-based features that can help folks cool. So, but in particular, thinking about youth sports programming and just the professionalization of youth sports that is not what I'm advocating around. It's the community leagues, the community teams who need access to fields, who can't, some of the leagues can't afford the fees to have permits. And that's something that has to be addressed if we are going to have a parks district. We have to address that. Play is essential to children's development. And they need unorganized play, but they also need structured play that comes with mentors who are going to open up areas of interest and spark ways that they can approach things. So I would love to see this appear in the work that we're doing around this ballot initiative, which I know is difficult because the costs are high. But I would also like to see our board speak about this issue. It's been a shock to me and I know that, Director Long has said that's one of the reasons that you're on the board is to keep bringing this issue forward. So I appreciate that as well. And I appreciate my responsibility there.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think one of the things sometimes, as we sort of dive into the order of magnitude picture that we lose is all of those individual really important features that make it up. So, when we talk about maintaining our system, that includes maintaining our sports fields, our pools, our aquatic facilities. When we talk about growing our park system, that includes adding more sports fields to, meet our community service needs, adding more community centers, adding more pools. All of those things are included in those categories on kind of the operating side. There's reducing cost as a barrier to access to community centers, but there's also discussions to be had about reducing cost as a barrier to permit access. So that's sort of in the orange bucket. So, you know, for the conversation tonight that we have zoomed up to the like 30,000 foot level, but all of those pieces are really, really, you know, important and actually are the why I think we all care about this. So I think, you know, as we get closer to something, there will be opportunities to help more specifically shape exactly how it's used and where it goes. But right now we are at that kind of really 30,000, you know, foot level.
That's great. And I think my comments were mostly in response to seeing this and understanding that it was high level, but also knowing that it's not a conversation that we have regularly as a group. And it can feel sometimes like it's like, oh, that'll take care of itself. That's true for any resourced neighborhoods and communities that youth sports will take care of themselves in some ways, not all the way. But it's not true in areas where there's mixed socioeconomic status or lower level of fields and facilities. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue to input into this work.
Thank you, Nova. Corbin.
So I have a few concerns. And so you're going to be addressing equity gaps by providing these services, by providing these amenities. But by providing those, you can also create new equity gaps, whether it's green gentrification or you know, housing prices going up, right, with this. And so it may be changing the conversation a little bit from what Adam was talking about, like disinvesting versus understanding that a neighborhood is established and you're just in like sort of a maintenance situation versus strategic investment in particular neighborhood. And my question is, who are you talking to that's in housing? Who are you talking to as far as organizations or businesses that house people, that they don't drive up their prices as soon as the trees start coming in, as soon as these amenities start going in? Because we have people in East Portland that don't have sidewalks and streets still, right? And so when they start seeing these investments come in, and you also see developers come in, and if that would be great if they were coming in with like not-for-profit, low-income public housing, but that's usually not the case. So how are we making sure that new inequities are going to occur and drive out the very people that actually need this the most?
Yeah, that's such a critical point. Lauren, do you want to talk, or I could speak to it briefly, but to kind of the work that we've been doing with other city bureaus around anti-displacement as so again, this isn't like specific capital projects, but we do have processes related to, you know, when a park goes in, thinking about that neighborhood. Are you still on, and do you want to speak to that at all?
I'm still on, but so far they haven't gotten to that level where they're talking about how our particular park causes displacement or doesn't cause displacement. Right now, what they're focusing on is 82nd, you know, and that whole corridor, which is going to be taken on by Peapod, and there's massive improvements and anti-displacement work happening there. So, and we don't have any park adjacent to that. So that's, so far we haven't really had a lot of input into that.
I have been part of some presentations though, where they talked about developing that process with all of the bureaus as a lens to use on projects. So I think, unless I misunderstood, I think that process is underway.
Yeah, it totally is. And our planning team has been going to those meetings. But as far as I know, so far, it hasn't really impacted any of our parks work per se.
There's something that sounds off to me right there, because if you're talking about the opportunity for tree maintenance and targeting low canopy areas and thinking about low income people getting these resources, it's so important that this gets figured out before anything takes place, because as soon as developers understand that a place is gonna be starting to get invested into, that's where the money signs start coming in. Cities putting in resources, meaning that I don't have to, as a developer, I can put up a building and it's $3,000 for a 1-bedroom. What's stopping that from happening with these new amenities and these new resources coming in? I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, but we need a really great safety net because folks can't move further east. Well, they could, so they're out of state. I've already experienced that in another city, seeing people leave the city because one, they can't afford it, and they might have to leave the state because they can't afford it because of amenities coming in. And I would hate to see that replicated here in Portland.
I mean, I do know that, as you referenced, Sarah, the work that Lisa Bates was doing for BPS addresses a lot of anti-displacement sort of approaches. I mean, I do think it would be helpful for parks and as we're thinking about these growth impacts to integrate that work a little bit more fully. So maybe that's an area that can be further moved in that direction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that the Bureau has been regularly meeting with BPS on sort of the development of this tool that could be used. And part of the idea is that we look more holistically as a city about the investments that we're making in certain areas. So park investments, but also right-of-way investments, also, you know, large infrastructure investments. So so I think it is being thought of in terms of how we support and think about all of the impacts from growth, both in terms of the positive benefits that we can provide to meet community needs, but also how we prevent some of the negative impacts that can come from that. I do note that it is 7, and I'm happy to continue, or we can also potentially add something to an additional agenda at a future date.
Yeah, I think if there's no other comments, we can adjourn the meeting, but I definitely think that there are some issues that we want to continue to ensure are moving in a direction that we want to see. So thank you for the update. And if there's anything for future agendas that folks want, please send them to me and Casey. And with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Is it thanks with a copy of the presentations that we saw today?
Yes. So, Sarah, did you hear Corbin? So if you could provide your deck. Sarah, would you mind sending that out to everybody? And
We went out already, but
I'm not sure. I can provide it if it hasn't gone out. Yeah.
Oh, didn't? No, I don't think so. I know the tree.
the tree one did.
Yeah, and the HRAR, but I don't think
I don't think they got it all.